So if this is your first Sunday, in this church we go through the Bible. We start in September, we end around May. And in our journey through the Bible, we are jumping forward again today to another pivotal point in the history of God's people, to the Babylonian exile. The book of Jeremiah tells us that the Babylonian Empire had taken over, had conquered the last independent tribe in the kingdom of Israel and had turned them into a vassal state. So they maintained their own government, but they were a vassal of this Babylonian Empire. And they were not pleased with the state of things, and they wanted their independence. And so they revolted continuously, not once, but several times in a row. And as a result of that, in 586 BCE, the Babylonians had had enough. And they marched on Jerusalem, the capital of the remnant of Israel. And they destroyed its city walls. They knocked down the gate. And then they destroyed the temple. And this is that temple that Solomon had built that we talked about a couple weeks ago. And then they carried most of the population away into exile. They took the king. They took anybody with any kind of power. They took anyone who was wealthy. They took anyone who was educated. They took artisans and craftspeople. And basically they took anyone they thought would be useful and anyone that they thought would be trouble. And they forcibly carried them into exile and resettled them inside the Babylonian Empire. Now it's interesting that Jeremiah the prophet ended up staying behind with the remnant that was left back in Jerusalem. And what you heard read today was him corresponding with these exiles that were settled in the Babylonian Empire. And you know they say that the job of a prophet is to trouble the comfortable and to comfort the troubled. And while Jeremiah had spent the past 20 years troubling the comfortable and warning that the path that Israel was walking was going to lead them to destruction. And then it did. And so now Jeremiah's job has shifted. He is now a prophet to a people who are in mourning, who have had so much taken from them, who have lost their homes. They've lost the lives that they were leading. They've been taken to a strange land. And the pain and the rage that people were feeling at their helplessness in the face of their circumstances, in the face of the decrees of this powerful empire, is actually not so much captured in the book of Jeremiah, but there is a first-hand account in the Bible. And it's one of the most troubling psalms that exists. Psalm 137 is written from the first-person perspective of one of the captives who were sent to Babylon. It says, "By the rivers of Babylon we sat and we wept, and we remembered Zion. There on the poplars we hung our harps. For there our captors asked us for songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, 'Sing us one of the songs of Zion.' Well, how can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. Remember, Lord, what the Edomites," it's a metaphorical name, "what the Edomites did on the day Jerusalem fell. Tear it down," they cried. "Tear it down to its foundations." O daughter of Babylon, doomed to destruction, happy is the one who repays you according to what you have done to us. And then it actually ends with something that I actually find so horrific. I don't want to really read it word for word, but it's that ending of that psalm that says, happy are those who murder your children. And that is famously one of those really hard to understand verses in the Bible. Why does God tell people to go around doing that? Well, the answer is because that's not what this is. God doesn't tell people to go around doing that. It's not a message from God. What we have here is the first person account of an exile in pain. That is a preserved expression of grief and rage after Babylon, after their government destroyed their homes and stripped away their rights and their freedoms and left them in a foreign land. And we learn in today's reading that after that happened, when those grieving people had been brought to Babylon, the prevailing question was, well, what now? And they wrote to Jeremiah, this grieving community, this grieving community, and God, through the prophet Jeremiah, reached out to comfort them. And God doesn't say what they wanted to hear, which that doesn't quite come through really clearly in this reading. But what they wanted to hear, and in fact what some of the religious leaders were saying, because that's what people wanted to hear, was that, oh no, just hang out for a minute. You're going to pack up and go home anytime now. Don't worry. It's going to be fine. And all the bad things that have happened, they're going to be fixed. You know, sort of a head in the sand sort of position about life. You know, all the bad things will go away if I just keep my eyes closed. And that is what the people wanted to hear. But what God actually told them through the prophet was, I think, infinitely more valuable. God says, no, you are where you are. You are in Babylon. You are in the Babylonian Empire right now. You are in exile, my friends. However, it doesn't matter like they want you to think it does. It is true that the cruelty that they have perpetuated will continue to have consequences. However, I will bless you anyway. And you will thrive anyway. You will thrive in the middle of the Babylonian Empire. I am calling you to put your roots down. Go ahead. You can form families. You can seek the peace of your city. Because you may not have picked that city, and honestly, I don't care how they feel about it, but it is yours now. And you will build peace within it. You'll continue to worship your God. You will raise children. You will do the things that bring you joy. God says, don't hang up your harps on the trees on the bank of the river Babylon, even after everything that they've done to you. You will sing your songs once again, because they cannot overcome my blessing for you. Theologian and professor Craig Kessner talks about the exiles. He says, they're finding themselves in a place they never expected to be. They're finding themselves in a place they never wanted to be. I get that. What happens when you find yourself, in terms of your life circumstance, in a place you never wanted to be, in a place where there's no quick fix? when there's a new normal that you have to get used to, not what you thought it would be. Jeremiah in these verses is calling those exiles to a remarkable shift in their thinking, to reorient their sights to what is around them, to what life can be right where they are. I think everyone has experienced this in large and small ways in our own lives, not ending up where we thought we would. Exile in its many different forms. The ending of relationships or the changing in careers. Illnesses and health conditions you never thought you would struggle with. Leaving a place where you thought you'd belong forever or losing a loved one. What would it mean to reorient ourselves to finding joy and family and life in the midst of these kind of changes? It's something I think we all should be thinking about. And going beyond the general, I think this lesson is especially applicable on this day, on this Transgender Day of Remembrance and Resilience, during a time when our own government is persecuting our own trans citizens with a cruelty that rivals that of Babylon. A time when that community and the rest of us who want to live in freedom and equality across race and gender often feel like we've been exiled in a strange land. This is an important word for us to hear today, that God has promises for us in these passages. In the NRSV version, verse 11 says, "For surely I know the plans I have for you, plans for your peace." Shalom, peace and wholeness wrapped up in one word. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a future and a hope. No one gets to take away your hope. Because it is bound up in God's promises for you. They can send you into exile all they like, but they don't get to take away your peace or your hope or the promises of God that you have a future and that there is hope in it, even if you can't see it right now. This is your city, and you are called to live in it, to form communities, to raise children, to build peace. Right where you are. And we do all of this with the blessing of God. Amen.